Hello everyone, Professor Kurzlik here. So I wanted to make a follow-up video looking at the media and how it operates differently in a democracy versus an authoritarian regime. So we read about and we made a video about the importance of the media from a 30,000 foot level. So I wanted to make a follow-up video thinking, well, okay, well, what role does the media play in a democracy versus an authoritarian regime? So, the media, as we know, and as we can imagine, is one of the clearest indicators of regime type because it sits really at the intersection of information and power. So we can think about this in terms of whoever controls information has a significant advantage in shaping political outcomes. So, in a democracy, the core expectation is that the media operates independently from the state. Journalists investigate, remember, they criticize, and they inform. The media, thus, acts as a watchdog of the government, holding leaders accountable. In authoritarian regimes, the expectation is basically almost the opposite. Media is not designed to challenge power, it is oftentimes designed to support and reinforce it. Rather than acting as a watchdog, the media often functions instead as a tool of the state. But once again, as we oftentimes say and look at, this is an absolute. These regime types are on a spectrum, on a pendulum. Some democracies are experiencing declining press freedom, and some authoritarian regimes allow limited criticism. So instead of thinking of this as a binary distinction between democracies and authoritarian regimes, it's actually more important to think about it as a continuum of media control and independence. So if we first focus on democracies, in theory, democratic systems are built on three key principles. First, the freedom of press. Journalists can report on political issues without fear of punishment, without fear of censorship or punishment. And then there's pluralism. There are multiple media outlets offering competing perspectives, not a single actor which monopolizes information and is the only place where citizens can get information from. And third, there's accountability. Media plays a role in exposing corruption, exposing policy failures, and abuses of power. This creates a system where citizens have access to a wide range of information, which ideally allows them to make informed decisions for themselves. Um, we know, though, that freedom does not necessarily produce consensus. In many democracies, media systems often produce information overload or fragmentation. And this is because individuals engage in self selection, like we talked about in our previous video. They fall into echo chambers. They find news that they agree with, and then that's where they get their news from. So, although they have the options and the opportunities to read from a wide variety of sources, they still choose particular ones. So, we know in a democracy that happens. So let's think for a minute about authoritarian regimes and the role that the media plays in authoritarian regimes. Here, the primary goal of the media, like we said at the outset, is not to simply inform citizens in a neutral way or to hold those in power accountable. It is instead to maintain regime stability. This leads to a very different media structure. First, we see widespread censorship. Information that is critical of the regime is oftentimes restricted or simply removed. We see state ownership or at least state influence of governmental policy. Major media outlets are often directly controlled by the government or closely aligned with it. Maybe those who are allies of the government control the media outlet. Third, we see propaganda. The regime actively promotes narratives that legitimize its role and shape public perception. So instead of multiple competing narratives that citizens can choose from and to pull together, the goal is a more controlled information environment. So we can think about, why do authoritarian regimes invest so heavily in controlling the media? And the simple answer there is because information is a threat to the regime. If citizens receive accurate information about corruption, economic failures, or political alternatives, it can undermine regime legitimacy and potentially mobilize opposition, maybe through protests in the street. So, thus, controlling information helps regimes do three things: limit dissent, you don't want people in the streets; shape public opinion; and prevent coordination among opposition groups. So, even if individuals are dissatisfied, they may not protest unless they believe others feel the same way. But by controlling the media, narratives, and alternatives to information, regimes can create the perception that dissent is isolated or even unpopular. So, media control is not just about persuasion, it's about preventing movements and uprisings. So we know that in democracies, the media is used to hold those in power accountable. In authoritarian regimes, this oftentimes looks quite different. Maybe the regime controls what narratives can be placed on TV, what narratives can be put in the newspaper. So again, as we said at the outset, this looks different in every country. But the broad understanding that we want to start with before we look at case studies is that authoritarian regimes control the media because they don't want those hallmark purposes of the media to hold those in power accountable. And so, just a brief overview of the media in an authoritarian setting versus a democratic setting. Thank you.